I want to move beyond customer experience, and I'm so done with CX. What I mean when I say I want to move on is I want to start talking about impact. I want to start talking about the bottom line. I want to start talking about revenues. I want to start drawing that line between, customer experience and revenues, customer experience and growth, customer experience, loyalty, repeat business. That's what I mean by saying moving beyond CX.
You're listening to CX Passport, the show about creating great customer experiences with a dash of travel talk. Each episode, we'll talk with our guests about great CX, travel, and just like the best journeys, explore new directions we never anticipated. I'm your host, Rick Denton. I believe the best meals are served outside and require a passport. Let's get going. Today, I'm excited to head back to Dubai. Well, actually, I'm technically heading to India when I talk today with Vimal Rai. It's what happens when you're talking to someone global, when you expect to turn on the camera and see them in Dubai and they're in India with Singapore background. That's what I love when you've got someone who has an incredible global experience and global focus. Well, Vimal and I came to know each other through an earlier CX Passport episode. It's Mark Ross Smith's episode number 78, which was focused on airline loyalty. Well, realizing that Vimal and I both had a shared interest in airlines, and actually, I kind of recall he and I were talking about where we were the type that we'd look up at the sky and wonder, oh, where's that flight coming from? Oh, where's that flight going? Which I can tell you annoys the crud out of my family when I do this. But realizing that shared interest, we are going to keep that conversation going leading into Vimal's appearance today. With depth in airline and travel experience, Vimal knows what makes those customers tick, what they're seeking in an experience, and what keeps them coming back or running away. In addition to that travel passion, Vimal founded Commercial Excellence Partners, focusing on large businesses to enable them to perform better at sales, marketing, and to be more customer-centric. Now, hear this, because what caught me off guard, especially given that focus on customer, when I was talking to Vimal earlier, he said this quote: he was kind of done with CX and looking to go beyond it. Well, that's interesting, especially for a guest on a customer experience podcast. I'm really interested to hear more about his perspective there. Now, when I first talked with Vimal, he was in Singapore. He's now moved to Dubai. I'm talking to him today in India. I've never been to Singapore or Dubai. I've been to India, which I loved. But I do hope to get to Singapore and Dubai someday. In the interim, we're just going to have to live vicariously through Vimal, and I welcome listeners to do the same. Vimal, welcome to CX Passport.
Thanks, Rick. Very nice to be here. It's an honor to be on your podcast. I'm an avid listener, and so to have this opportunity to speak with you is a real honor. Thank you.
Well, the honor is then shared, or certainly mine, because I am so excited to finally get you on the show. I know we've had some hiccups along the way, and it's so great to finally have you recording today. Let's start with that shared interest in the airlines that I mentioned in the intro. You and I love the idea of airlines and travel. But man, the reality is so disappointing these days. Why is customer experience so broken in the aviation industry?
So there's a couple of smaller ones like traveler expectations, right? We know that traveler expectations are changing constantly. And when you come into contact with an airline, whether you're booking a ticket or you're flying or you're doing anything, checking in, using the lounge, our experiences and our expectations are actually shadowed and uh, the expectations that we bring in our interaction with the airline have been set by other service providers who have set the
Mm.
benchmark for the airline on behalf of the airline, right? So if you talk about, airlines bringing people from A to B, well, hey, guess what? There's an Uber that does that, right? And you can track it on an app, and it's even if it's late, you know what's going to happen.
Right.
If you're buying something on an airline website, hey, we're all used to buying stuff on a website called Amazon, right? And we've got one-click checkout, and you can tell when your product's being delivered and so on and so forth. And you've got reviews and you've got clarity and transparency. You talk about refunds. I mean, there's all sorts of startups and disruptive SaaS companies that give you refunds almost immediately, right? If you talk about loyalty, which is another big thing with airlines, there's Netflix, right? There's your local grocery store who knows you. They treat you well because they know you, they know what you like, and they keep giving you more of what you like. Airlines, heck, sometimes they can't even do the basics of getting you from A to B. So that's kind of one of the reasons, one of the small
Yeah.
reasons why I think customer experience is so broken. There's a couple of big reasons though, and maybe so there's two big reasons I can think of, right? So, most travelers have either too much or too little choice in the market.
Mm,
In some markets, like in Dubai, for example, there's basically a very finite choice of airlines I can fly, depending on where I need to go. And
right.
in other markets, like in India, where I am right now, there's way too many choices of airlines on the same routes. And so what
Yeah.
this means, in either scenario, what this means is that there's no real incentive for the airlines to invest in CX beyond the absolute minimum, right?
Hmm.
Either if you control the market or if everybody else is in the same market as you, there's an absolute minimum where most airlines will not go beyond, right? And you'd be silly to not sort of keep to that minimum expectation. You might not do it if you're a new entrant in the market. You might go beyond the usual and launch a promotion that differs from everybody else, but basically
Right.
everybody comes back down to the minimum. And I think the second biggest reason why airline CX is in dire straits is unfortunately down to the outcome of the first big reason that I told you, where there's too little or too much choice in the market.
Mm-hmm.
And the result of that too little, too much choice is basically we, as customers, we acquiesce to bad CX, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, right, I mean, we accept it, So airlines have
Yeah.
started putting 10 seats in a row. We get every now and then you hear about bad crew service. There's delayed flights, there's late or no refunds, there's terrible food, and we complain, yeah, but in spite of that famous statistic that says 50 to 80% of customers will switch service providers after one bad experience, really, do we do that in the airline industry? I don't really think so, right? So if
You,
I'm using a CRM in sales, I have 800 other choices. But
yeah.
if I'm flying my airline with my loyalty points, I don't really have that choice, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point there. When I've asked that question before, we get into things like the operational complexity and the regulatory
Mm,
environment and the fact that, well, if somebody fails me in a grocery store, maybe I get a spoiled grapefruit. Whereas if I'm failed in the airline industry, I'm abandoned or, God forbid, some sort of catastrophic event. And so there are elements to the airline industry that are unique there. You bring in something there about customer choice and the absence of choice, or perhaps the absence of how about this? The perception of the absence of choice in consumers drives a lot of that. I know that it took me a long time to fire a certain airline from my domestic business, and I was willing to put up with just increasingly bad service because I was an ex lifetime member with them and in theory received some element of loyalty. I never really saw that loyalty manifested, but in theory I had it there. And so both the Fortress Hub, like you're describing in Dubai, I would think many would argue that the Dubai Fortress Hub airline there does deliver great CX. Still, though, the point of the absence of choice and the tie of loyalty helps drive some of that.
This is your captain speaking. I want to thank you for listening to CX Passport today. We've now reached our cruising altitude, so I'll turn that seatbelt sign off. While you're getting comfortable, hit that follow or subscribe button on your favorite podcast app so you'll never miss an episode. Love it if you'd tell a friend about CX Passport, leave a review so others can discover the show as well. Now, sit back and enjoy the rest of the episode.
In that vein, Vimal, it's related to the airlines. But it's a thing that the airlines and us as passengers use. We've seen transformations driven out of COVID. And I know that you and I are talking several years after, well, maybe just a few years after what we kind of perceive as the end or the waning days of that global pandemic. Some have used that to transform their experiences. And you were a part of that in an airport situation. So in the Brussels airport, you helped them transform their experience to be something that was actually great, something delightful. Tell me more about that transformation out of the Brussels airport.
yeah, Rick. So this was driven by a local sort of infrastructure professional services organization that was close to Brussels Airport, and they contacted me and they asked me for my help on a relaunch strategy. Right, this was sort of very early on in the pandemic when a few of the very forward-thinking airports in the world were trying to actually put in place a plan to relaunch operations, right? Anticipating that borders would open up and travel would resume at some point fairly quickly. I mean, little did we know that, the travel world was going to shut down for almost two
Yeah.
years, right?
Right.
But we worked on a plan which was driven very much from the customer backwards. Whilst the people that I worked with, the people that actually hired me to help them, were working in terms of tools and sort of digital tools and technology and processes and all of that outwards, right? So the airport was very focused on how do we manage the things that we are in control of, whilst I was brought in as the customer advocate, right? And so what I did was, in a nutshell, I came up with the 3R plan, and the 3Rs really stand for relaunch, recover, and regrowth. And what that means really simply is, how do we approach the relaunch of operations? What are some of the facets of relaunch that we need to cover? And one of them was obviously, you need to win the hearts and the minds of customers. You need to convince them. You need to give them the confidence that you've taken care of their needs around COVID, the new needs around COVID, being touchless. And of course, the minute you talk about touchless, then you start to see the value of digital marketplaces or digital platforms, right? And at that point, Brussels Airport was struggling to get people to get onto its digital platform. And so this would have been the perfect opportunity, after relaunch and as part of the recovery process, to actually get customers on board the digital platforms that they were creating. And then when you really look at regrowth, so, sort of phase one, phase two, phase three. So phase one, relaunch; phase two, recover; and phase three, regrowth, is when you really look at the results of the last few months of relaunch and regrowth, relaunch and recover, and then, plan ahead and see how you can, drive more of passengers to use that digital marketplace. And so it was really about focusing on customers, focusing on creating confidence, and then bringing in commercial elements at the end because, as you know, I mean, airports ultimately thrive on non-aeronautical revenues as well.
Right. Right. Well, I like that, and I like the 3 Rs. I hope that you've got that trademarked or a part of your methodology, taking that forward. That's a very effective way to take that forward and understand how can we bring that customer centricity. And I like talking about that in the context of airports. I've had guests on that are responsible for airports and the like, and it's not something that we natively think about as passengers, and yet there's a lot of thought that goes into what does that experience, what is it like, so that not only passengers are satisfied with it, but airlines, the ones that sort of create certainly element of the lifeblood of the airport, that the experience for the airline is great as well. Let's step away from airlines, even though I guarantee you and I could talk that whole time about airlines and travel. I know that I'm channeling a show from the 1990s. Heck, I still watch episodes. But when you and I talked earlier, you mentioned going beyond customer experience, or if I may say it, you were on a break with CX. What's driving you to want to go beyond customer experience? What does that look like?
So, Rick, I need to clarify what I meant. And the problem was as follows. With given my background, when I started working with airlines and then moved on to work in other industries around travel and around aviation, most of the time when I read about CX, or when I came into this understanding that there's this thing called customer experience, right? What I was reading was, basically discussions of bad service, problematic situations,
Mm-hmm.
rude people, broken systems, legacy technology, all the normal things that we can complain about. And I think one of the things that I realized after a few years was that we need to accept that, that problems happen, right? And nobody's perfect, and systems break down. We need to expect that. But we also need to remember that hindsight is 2020. It always is. Everyone is Einstein after the fact, right? Everybody knows everybody knows what you should have done when that happened. The problem I saw was that we all stopped. We stopped right there. So we all saw that there was a problem. We all saw what was wrong. We all came out with these wonderful theories of what should have happened. But then we stop there. And you never read about anything that, talks about the real impact of what happened. What was the change that was instituted? What's been put in place to mitigate similar circumstances that might happen again? And that's the
Mhm.
bit that I saw as a big hole in CX. So when I say that, I want to move beyond customer experience, and I'm so done with CX. What I mean to say is I'm so done with the normal elements of CX. What I mean when I say I want to move on is I want to start talking about impact. I want to start talking about the bottom line. I want to start talking about revenues. I want to start drawing that line between, customer experience and revenues, customer experience and growth, customer experience, loyalty, repeat business. That's what I mean by saying moving beyond CX. And that's not very easy to do, even today.
You have hit my heart there. I didn't actually expect, because you and I didn't talk about exactly what you meant by this. So that has me feeling as if I could say the same sentence, that I too want to move beyond CX. Now, I actually would rather bring CX, the label, forward into your definition, yet regardless of how we label it, I 100% agree with the idea that we've got to move to action. My little pithy phrase is stop, survey, and score, start, listen, and act, focusing on voice of the customer elements of this. But the reality is, if we aren't generating some element of business progress, of customer progress, these are for profit businesses typically that we're working for. There is a whole nonprofit customer experience segment as well. It is still a result that is intended with the improving of experience. And if we aren't driving towards that, then we continue to see some of the, let's just call them departures of customer experience leaders and departures of customer experience teams because they weren't perceived as being effective. I can get on board with going beyond CX if that's what your definition is. We've got to get to action.
Yeah, so it's one of the reasons I actually co-founded Commercial Excellence Partners, right? I want to work with the biggest brands to move beyond just CX. I mean, we do a whole lot of work on the pure commercial elements, but when it comes to customer experience, that's my specialty in the business. And I want to truly understand how to draw that link between customer experience, revenue, customer experience, cost, design the value that appeals to customers, and deliver that value through your products, through innovation, through your services. I want to talk about pricing and the impact that has on customer experience. I want to talk about positioning and the impact that that has on customer experience. I want to be able to draw a pretty, quantifiable line as far as is possible between customer experience and the money that your business is spending or making in the future.
Amen. Okay, right there. We're not going to stop because I have more that I want to ask you about, but we could stop there because of the fact that that's exact. Like, to me, that's what's where we are right now. When I talk to clients, that's exactly it. How are you generating actual results? Don't, and I sometimes flip it on the head. Don't talk to me if you aren't interested in generating business results. I don't care about your NPS score. I care about what your business result is as a result of the increase or decrease of that NPS score. Let's step out of the business space for a bit, because I know I'm talking to you in India, but you were in Singapore. You've moved to Dubai. You're living in Dubai most of the time. You've lived in two world-class cities with those. These are two world-class airports, two world-class city experiences, two very, very global cities. They sound incredibly similar, and yet we know they're also incredibly different. I would love to just know, what are some of your favorite stories of both cities and your experiences there? And what are you finding similar as you've made the move, and what have you found to be surprisingly different?
Oh, great question and loads of answers there, Rick.
Yeah.
So I'm
Now we
Singaporean. I
only have a
was,
half hour.
yeah, I know. So I'm Singaporean. I was born and brought up in Singapore. So, everything that Singaporean males have to go through, that's going through the army, I've done all of that. I studied political science, so I spent, 30 years of my life in Singapore from being born there to before I moved out. And then I spent a chunk of time away from Singapore. And when I say a chunk, I mean a chunk. I mean, I didn't live in Singapore for 21 years. And in those 21 years, I lived in 5 different countries, 10 other cities. So it's not just, I've lived in Madrid, I've lived part of the time in Barcelona. I've lived in Hong Kong. So I've lived in a few
These are like my
different
favorite
world-class
cities in the
cities.
world.
Yeah, exactly, right? So it's everything that I bring with me today is accumulation. It's an accumulation of all my experiences across all of these cities. Um, so I have that unique ability to be a local in Singapore and speak Singlish, which is what we call Singaporean English. And I have that ability to be a local, and I have that ability to also be a relative outsider if I need to be, because I've spent 2/3 of my life away from Singapore, right? Um, and Dubai is a very different place to Singapore. It's actually on a completely different growth trajectory and a learning curve, I would say. Singapore
Hmm.
is, it's small, it's concentrated, but it's very mature. It's a very young country. We gained independence in 1965, but economically, it's a pretty mature country and a pretty mature workforce and a pretty mature government, right? Dubai is a very different ball game altogether. It's a very vast land. So compared to Singapore, which is a tiny dot, Singapore is like 660 square kilometers or something. Dubai is a,
I know.
you know, vast land, right? Even a desert, if you like. But it's also the gateway to the rest of the Middle East, right? And it's a showcase for. I think not many people see it this way, but Dubai is actually a showcase for Arabian culture and hospitality and the Arabian economy, right? It is a melting pot and a petri dish sort of rolled into one. And what that means is, it's a melting pot. It's unlike Singapore where you've got 90% locals and 10% expats. Dubai is the other way around. It's 10% locals and 90% expats. So that's the melting pot. And it's a
Wow.
petri
Okay.
dish because with so many different cultures and so much growth happening at within such a short period of time, everything almost everything is based on trial and error. Almost everything is an experiment, right?
Hmm.
Dubai wants to double its population in the next 7 years. That's going from 3.6 million to over 7 million, right?
Yeah.
The pressures that come with that kind of
Yeah.
growth, population growth, is mind-boggling, right? So there's a lot of planning, there's a lot of money, there's a lot of resources going into building up the infrastructure, and not just the infrastructure, but the people element, the technology element, the process element. All of that is relatively lagging behind in terms of the great, beautiful infrastructure and architecture that you see in Dubai. All of these things are still lagging behind, right? And
Hmm.
and so that's kind of what I want to tap into by moving into Dubai.
Well, them all with Singapore, with Dubai. I mentioned two world-class airports and two frequently places that to get there from most of us or many of us around the world, it's a long flight to get there. And so it can be nice to stop into the lounge, take a little break, and enjoy. And so today we're going to do that. I'm going to invite you to join me here in the first class lounge. We'll move quickly here and have a little bit of fun. What is a dream travel location from your past?
It's got to be French Polynesia.
Oh, I
Most
can
people call
imagine.
it Tahiti.
Yeah.
Most people call it Tahiti, and most people know Bora Bora. But so it's five groups of islands, and three of them are atolls, if I remember correctly. So I spent a week or two in Bora Bora, and then I spent a week in a place called Nuku Hiva, which is not an atoll. And Nuku Hiva is famous for being, if I'm not mistaken, in one of the survival series.
Oh,
They've got cannibals on the island, apparently.
oh, okay. All right. Well, I'm glad that that didn't affect you significantly. But I know how beautiful that is. I would love to see it sometime. What is a dream travel location you've not been to yet?
There's two that are top on my list. So there's the Seychelles, and I have no idea
Hmm.
why. I just think it sounds sexy, it sounds beautiful. Ever since I was a little kid, Seychelles is a place I really want to go to.
Hmm.
But the one that as an adult I really want to go to is this little part of the world called the Antarctica.
Oh
Um,
yeah, yeah.
it's not it's not easy to get to. It's not really a tourist sort of a place, but I really want to go there. I really want to just disconnect and just be with nature.
too want to get Antarctica in the list. And a little bit of a selfish just shout out here since we're talking Antarctica. That's the only continent that I don't have a guest for CX Passport from yet. So I'm still looking for that scientist that wants to be on CX Passport. So when you go, Vimal, would you recruit for me? I would appreciate that. Hopefully that
I
can
will.
happen soon. Thanks so much. What is a favorite thing of yours to eat?
I'm a foodie, man. I mean, I love food. I love looking at food. I love seafood. That means I see food and I eat it. Um,
Yeah.
you know, but my favorite would have to be almost any Singaporean dish, right? So I don't know if you're familiar, but there's laksa, there's mee goreng, which is fried noodles, there's chicken rice, there's curry. I also love Japanese. I love burgers. I love Japanese burgers.
So it's all the above.
I
So
could
this
go on.
question may be a trick for you then. What is something your parents forced you to eat but you hated as a kid?
Ah, bitter gourd. Bitter gourd. Do you know what that is?
I don't.
It's bitter gourd. It's a type of
Hmm.
bitter melon. It's in the same family apparently as zucchini and squash, and all of those things are fine. But bitter gourd, oh my God, it is it is diabolical. It looks diabolical. It tastes diabolical. It is bitter, right? It's
Wow. So you win on two fronts there. One, I've never heard of bitter gourd, so that's great. That's something new for me, and I always love seeing people's reactions. But then two, I don't think I've heard anyone say that a food item was diabolical. And so you introduced two new things for me in one question. Brilliant. I love it. Oh, I'm going to have a good chuckle about that one. Let's close out the lounge here, heading back to travel. What is one travel item, not including your phone or your passport, that you will not leave home without?
ooh, there's quite a few, but at the top of the list is my running shoes. I just love exploring any place that I get to on foot. So if I have a few hours between meetings, I just put those shoes on and I go walking, I go running, I just go exploring. I figure the streets out. I'd never travel without a pair of shoes. And if I actually forget, I'm actually almost guaranteed to go buy a pair.
Vimal, you and I are kindred spirits, not just in the loving of the airlines, but that one specifically. It is amazing what happens when you just get on the sidewalk and start wandering. Hong Kong is one of those cities where I felt that way, where you just wander and you find yourself in nooks and crannies that you wouldn't if you were in a car or in a taxi or anything along those lines. And actually, I do have an actual story of forgetting my tennis shoes in Hong Kong and finding a sporting goods store and buying tennis shoes there. So we are
There
more
you go.
kindred spirit than we realized. You know, let's go back to that heading beyond customer experience. I'm going to drag you back once more, even though now I understand even better what you mean by that. I've had a lot of former CX Passport guests talk about this. And in fact, recently, Sandra Thompson just came on the show and she talked about EI. And I know you talked about it on LinkedIn recently, emotions and customer experience. So you called out that most organizations fail to leverage the power of their customers' emotions and feelings. Now, you've hit my heart. Amen. Totally agree. But why? Not so much that that's true, but why is it true? Why are companies so reluctant or unaware of the importance of emotions in customer experience?
Rick, it's because emotions are not quantifiable, right?
Yeah.
A business
Yeah.
enterprise is all about, it's all about, so any business, and you said it earlier, any for-profit business is all about drawing that line from market to product to pricing to sales to revenues and then underlining costs and so on and so forth, right? Revenue and cost attribution is actually how businesses evaluate performance. That's just how it's done, right? It's all
Right.
about shareholder value and returns. And so where's customer emotions in all of this? You can't pin a number, you can't pin a metric, you can't even try to identify all the emotions that your customers go through when they interact with your brand. And if you can't identify it, there's no way you're going to link it to your sales performance, right? Emotions aren't mathematical. They're not really a science in the sense that, you can't have a hypothesis and definitively prove something based on an experiment, right?
Mm.
At most you might ask, you might draw some conclusions. And so as a consequence of struggling with customer emotions, businesses focus on what they can control and what they can quantify and what they can measure easily. And so you've got things like CSATs and NPS and customer lifetime value and customer retention rates and effort scores, and all of that is fine, right? I think businesses head in the right direction with all of these metrics, but most of them don't go beyond that and try to understand the emotions that fuel customer behaviors. So all these metrics that I mentioned are good in terms of explaining what a customer is going through, um, how they rate their interactions with you, with your brand, and how much time they're spending, and how many processes or steps are taken. But none of them actually are able to identify the emotions that drive a customer to make a decision over another, right? To make one choice
Yeah.
over another. So, again, as I mentioned earlier, it's one of the reasons I founded Commercial Excellence Partners, because I find that the focus that we as a business and my partners have on customer centricity and the work that we are doing as individual consultants in the business, to truly sort of drive to truly drive enterprises to better commercial performance, there is a very strong alignment with customer emotions, right? And I'm in the process of developing that alignment, particularly because I think we are on the cusp of a tremendous opportunity, right? There's one phrase we haven't mentioned on your podcast, Rick, and that's artificial intelligence,
Yeah.
right?
The one episode
We
that we
are,
haven't talked about it, you're right.
yeah. And I think we're on the cusp of a tremendous opportunity for enterprises to deliver new value, enhanced value, right? Because of artificial intelligence. So what we're designing at CEP is we're helping companies to design, build, and create new value so that they can use emotional connections, and emotional values that they identify within their customers, as a business strategy for growth.
Yeah. I always find this is it probably would take us way down a rabbit hole here, but I find it always interesting when we have to have a conversation about, how do we get emotion into business? How do we do that? Well, business is nothing more than just well, at least for now, a collection of humans that have emotions. So you would think that our collection of humanity would then make it more emotional inside a business. And yet we find that to be the most emotionless entity it feels like out there is inside the business world. Your approach of drawing it through the customer metrics and the like to results makes a lot of sense to me. Vimal, we are at time. There's a few other things I'd want to ask you, but we are at time, and I would love to, give the listeners a little bit of opportunity to know how can they learn more about you, your travel experience, your approach to customer experience, your choice to go beyond customer experience. How can people get in touch with you?
Well, yeah, well, Rick, I'm all over LinkedIn. I'm on it every day, half an hour a day at least. I'm pretty prompt, so just look for me on LinkedIn, Vimal Rai. Um, you got to recognize this. I believe in the journey being more valuable than the destination. So you're going to see that in my headline banner. Yeah, I'm an open networker, so I
Good.
connect with almost anyone who reaches out to me.
I will get that in the show notes as well. I'll also get a way for folks to find out a little bit more about Commercial Excellence Partners as well in the show notes. Vimal, learned a lot, kind of a wide-ranging episode. This one went, as the intro says, in directions I wasn't expecting. And so I enjoyed that. Thank you for teaching me certainly about your travel experiences, what it means to go beyond CX, and then this idea of connecting emotions to the actual business results and how you can go about that. Great conversation today, Vimal. Thank you for being on CX Passport.
Thank you very much, Rick. I enjoyed it.
Thanks for joining us this week on CX Passport. If you like today's episode, I have 3 quick next steps for you. Click subscribe on the CX Passport YouTube channel or your favorite podcast app. Next, leave a comment below the video or a review in your favorite podcast app so others can find and enjoy CX Passport too. Then head over to cxpassport.com for show notes and resources that can help you create tangible business results by delivering great customer experience. Until next time, I'm Rick Denton, and I believe the best meals are served outside and require a passport.